Welcome to the Educating Mindfully Learncast, where we support mental health and well-being in education through mindfulness-based learning. Our Learncast is like a podcast, but with connected, reflective learning in our online community, which also has the opportunity for educators to earn professional development hours. This Learncast is a special experience for mindful educators and leaders to personally grow their practices within and beyond education as mindful global citizens. Before we begin, we invite you to pause where you are for an invitational intention. Perhaps placing your hands on your heart. And together we will take 4 collective breaths, 1 breath for each ripple within our framework's educational ecosystem. Breathing in first for ourselves, and exhale. Next, breathing in for our staff, and exhale. Then breathing in for our students, and exhale. And breathing in for society as a whole, including families and communities. And exhale. Consider pausing and committing to yourself a collective intention by saying, I am a mindful global citizen. We look forward to learning with you as we continue educating mindfully together. My name is Lindsey Frank, and on behalf of our leadership team, we thank you for being you. Our episodes are supported by our mindful partners. Consider becoming a mindful partner today to be featured on an upcoming Learncast episode. Learn more at educatingmindfully.org/partners. Welcome to the next episode of the Educating Mindfully Learncast titled Empowering Educators and Communities Through Mindful Self-Regulation. I am Lindsey Frank, the Educating Mindfully President, Director, and the host for today's episode. And I am here with Carrie Rohrbach. Welcome, Carrie.
Hi, Lindsey. So great to see you.
Grateful, always grateful to have space together here. Carrie is an educational, writing, and spiritual thought partner, and she offers support to individuals and communities. She's a former classroom teacher with over 20 years of experience teaching and tutoring. Carrie is pursuing her doctorate in transformative action in education, and her dissertation is quite powerful and very interesting, and it considers the use of tarot cards as a means of mindful self-inquiry to heal from the trauma of educational burnout and systemic oppression. So very fascinating. She is a NARM, which stands for, or NARM trained, and what that stands for is Neuro-Affective Relational Model. Let me say that one more time. Neuro-Affective Relational Model trained trauma-informed professional and a registered yoga teacher and social emotional learning facilitator through Breathe for Change. Whew. Carrie, she currently works as a professional learning facilitator at a Sacramento-based nonprofit, and she is also a board member of Educating Mindfully and was also one of the co-authors for our Mindfulness-Based Learning Framework. So thank you again for being here today, Carrie.
I am thrilled to be here. This was an invitation from you a couple of weeks ago, and it had been sitting on my heart. And finally, 2 days ago, I said, you know what? Do you still have someone or do you still need someone? And you said yes. And so we figured today would work to talk, but I know that you're going to get a little bit into mindful self-regulation, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how we arrived here to this moment.
Yes, it's been quite a journey. And for our listeners, regulation and specifically mindful self-regulation is something I think we all know very well in our fields and also can tune in further in what we do. So, just to give more context here as we begin, I just want to share with our community about our mindfulness-based learning framework, especially for those who maybe this is your first LearnCast episode with us. And also, I want to define mindful self-regulation for our shared context together. So, our framework itself looks like an ecosystem. And so, please visit our website, which is educatingmindfully.org/framework, so that you can actually see a visual of what we're talking about. And within the ecosystem, there are 4 trees to represent the mindfulness based learning skill progression. And that skill progression, it aligns and elevates our social and emotional skill development. And you can also find a free download of our skill progression on our website as well. So, mentioning for resources here. But within the ecosystem and the trees, one of the trees is mindful self regulation, which is our focus for this episode. So, when we share mindful self regulation, what we mean is that mindful self-regulation expands from identifying and managing emotions, thoughts, and behaviors into integrating proactive practices to regulate the nervous system. So this increases the intentional responses to unexpected and emotionally charged experiences. I'm laughing because this happens throughout our day, right? We have these unexpected emotionally charged situations and experiences. And through regulation, this strengthens then our resilience, and it invites the opportunity for co-regulation with others. And I know I can share this as a fact that, Carrie and I have worked very closely together over the years, and being able to share space together and in that co-regulation space, it's just amazing that this is the LearnCast episode that we have together. So what we share in our mindfulness-based learning micro-credential program that I want to mention as well, is when you are regulated, you also create a way of being that is proactive and naturally regulating throughout the day, and that supports any situation. And I think that's the key here, with regulation, is that proactive side. So you can learn more about joining our program at educatingmindfully.org as well. So let's just take a moment here to pause and notice, and perhaps where your own level of self-regulation is, and even mindful self-regulation at this very moment. Noticing and tuning inward to the body. And with that awareness, perhaps even opening the heart to set an intention to grow this proactive approach within your own ecosystem. Just perhaps taking a collective breath in and collective breath out. So, Carrie, is there anything from even just planting the seeds there that you want to call forth, or do we want to kind of just jump into some questions?
One thing that I think is really important to name at the onset is that self-regulation doesn't mean you're calm all the time. So
Yes.
you talked about these proactive practices, and I think that is the key because we know that life is going to throw us curveballs, and we're going to talk about those curveballs. But what is really important is that those emotional responses aren't coming from a reactive and dysregulated place. So we can still feel sad and angry and stressed, but we have the tools to then say, up, I notice that I'm moving far into anger, for instance. What is it that I need to help to just expel some of that emotional charge? So we let ourselves feel those feelings. This isn't about dismissing feelings. It isn't about tamping them down. And I wanted to say, because we did work together on creating this framework, that we intentionally changed the language from management. And even I mentioned that I have this Harvard Medical School article that I'm referring to. They talk about controlling. And both of those words just have a certain connotation that I don't think necessarily has a place when it comes to regulation. I think regulation is much more like we have these guideposts, which in my mind are those proactive practices that we work within. And so we can still let our emotions run, as they need to. But what we're ultimately doing is giving ourselves spaces to feel those feelings so that way we can kind of come back to that center.
Mm, yes. And just the power of being able to feel and name. And I appreciate you calling that forward of like, we're not trying to push them down or ignore them. Like we need to feel them. That is a part of being human, because then emotions are data. And then we can take that data and say, okay, how can I regulate and manage, right? They do go hand in hand, but that regulation, when we are able to have that as more of like our baseline, then when those unexpected situations come up, we can actually identify it, and we can choose to do any kind of practice or choice to bring us back to, riding the waves instead of just massively surfing.
Right. I think about people who go to any type of therapy, whether it's a massage therapy, physical therapy, or, cognitive therapy. And, sometimes people think I only go there when I'm in crisis, right? I only go to the physical therapist when I'm having a flare up. I only get a massage when I'm in pain. I only go see my, behavioral therapist when I'm emotionally distraught. But what you just mentioned is so important is that we have to know what our baseline is. So when we are proactive in having these tools and supports that let us identify what baselines are, then we're more easily able to identify when we're outside of our zone of comfort when it comes to that emotion.
Yes, yes. And some of us know like that window of tolerance and being able to increase that window as well. So yeah. Well, we kind of started already planting that seed, but just really naming again the difference between that management and regulation. So we there's really that continuum. Can you maybe share a bit like how that maybe unfolds a bit so it's really clear? And even yeah, we had another episode around self-awareness and how awareness is also different than connection. Well, this kind of has that same kind of nuance, and if you can share a little bit more.
Yes. And I do think they all go hand in hand, right? That's one of the things that is so powerful about an ecosystem is that none of these elements work in isolation. They all play off of the other one. And so you can have self-regulation alongside awareness, alongside connection, and usually the practices are the things that give you that baseline. So when I think about the difference between those, for instance, you brought up the neuroaffective relational model, NARM, which I am trained in, and we talk about how A lot of times it's very hard to even identify what our emotions are. So whether we grew up in a, wonderful household with caregivers who were attuned to our needs, who gave us what we needed, or maybe there was a little dysfunction, there was a little chaos. It can be really hard as an adult if we've never unpacked that to even be aware of what we're feeling. So I do think that the first step might be awareness, is just identifying, okay, I have a charge going through my system. For me, for instance, when I notice I am feeling emotional, there's like almost like a swelling that I feel at the back of my throat. And that's when I'm like, oh, okay, there's some grief there. So I notice that, right? That's the awareness. Then the next piece is the connection, right? So, okay, I'm noticing that swelling. What might that be telling me? Is there some grief that I need to process right now? And then the regulation piece comes in right after it, which is, what is it that I need right now? Do I just need to cry? Is this not a great place to cry? Do I need to take a couple deep breaths and, let my grief know that I will tend to it later? All of that is part of this ecosystem to make sure that we are not just, like I said at the onset, just shutting down emotions because we don't want to feel them, but to acknowledge them, to validate them, and to give them space, because it's only in feeling all of our ranges of emotions that we can expand that window of tolerance. So while a lot of people don't want to feel anger or don't want to feel grief, that is actually the key to then feeling joy and connection and
Mhm.
aliveness. So to be able to feel that huge range of emotions is important. And the regulation piece, a lot of it comes, I think, also with psychological safety, right? If we're in a place where we are feeling that we can express that emotion, then hopefully we're encouraged to do so. However, we know that, especially as educators, crying in front of your students might not be the best thing. Yelling at your students is definitely not the best thing. Do we do it? Yes. Sometimes the stress gets to a certain point where that's how the charge is released. But then we know that we can repair. Then we know that we can go back and model, hey, I was very emotional. I responded in a certain way, and I want to let you all know that it has nothing to do with you. You didn't make me feel this way. You didn't make me act this way. And here I am, showing you what a very positive expression of emotion can be. And if I did cause harm, I'm acknowledging it and hopefully having an opportunity to repair that with students.
Hmm. Thank you for naming that too. Two things really stuck out as you were sharing. One, thank you for even modeling right now and giving language to educators and leaders for, if that did happen, they have this ability to even go back in our learn cast and maybe embody that language that you just shared on how to, repair that moment in time, which then brings me to that second awareness was how we have a start and a stop of an experience. And sometimes that may be a long duration or a short duration, but there's still that start and a stop. And, I resonate with that too, because, even before getting on our call today, we all have moments of dysregulation. And I really was feeling quite dysregulated, which for our listeners, that's why I keep kind of laughing because really before we were on here, man, I even texted Carrie and was saying, maybe we should reschedule. I am feeling a little dysregulated, but then we figured, oh, this is actually perfect for our theme today. But, noticing that instances happen. And even when several things happen throughout the day and pile on top of each other, and then if we don't release them in time, then that explosion kind of happens. As Carrie already kind of mentioned this, but I'm revalidating so that in my nervous system, I'm validating it too. And then, for me, I felt constriction in my chest area. And then I also find myself kind of doing more of like a stomping or like my just the body constricts itself. And I realized, it's the charge, right? And Carrie's been mentioning about charge, but the charge in my body, when we feel like that anger and frustration, we naturally want to stomp our feet and clench our fists, and we can actually just exaggerate that and shake and stomp. And that's exactly what I did before our episode. I went into my space before we recorded. I stomped, and I was just kind of shaking out the charge and just like pretending to get it out from the body, but not really pretending, because you are getting it out from the body, but just embodying what it felt like to feel and then process through, and then we're here ready and regulated. So the power of that, and even like our calming spaces we may have in our classrooms, like they all have a purpose. So thank you for letting me share all of that.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I think this is really important because emotions do have a life cycle. And if we do not complete them, they linger. And that's one of the principles of NARM is that NARM is usually from a psychotherapeutic perspective, but they do have a basics training that is open to anyone in helping professions. And I did it in 2022. So some of the language may have changed since then. But one of the things that they talk about is they're not necessarily advocating catharsis as the solution to everything, but they do want us to name that when these emotions are not completed, they will come out in another way. And so, what tends to happen is that we get in these patterns to try to avoid the emotional completion process. And then, what happens is we develop these really, really important and smart strategies to survive, but then we never complete those emotions. And what happens is it comes out in another way. So if someone, again, I kind of bring everything back to childhood because that's where we have our earliest examples of emotional regulation or not. So if someone is, noticing that there's a lot of like unprocessed anger from their childhood, but instead of feeling anger, they take it out in unhealthy ways, then that unhealthy way ends up becoming the way to cope as opposed to just feeling the feeling. And so I think allowing yourself to feel the feeling to its natural completion, and I think research says that most emotions last less than 2 minutes. It might be like 90 seconds or something. If we can breathe through it, if we can dance through it, if we can shake through it, if we can lie down through it, anything, we've had these other learn casts about practices. Any practice that is healthy and supportive in allowing that emotion to be completed is welcome. And that's what self-regulation is, right? It allows us to say, I'm in this place where this emotion needs to do what it needs to do. And once I can feel that, then I'm at this place where I can feel flexible. I can feel able to persevere. I can use my values to guide me in how I react or respond and how I decide. And all of that is much more preferable than the unhealthy coping mechanisms that maybe we've developed.
And how important that is in our classrooms, and even within our teams, right? Just our entire ecosystem as a whole, the importance that regulation in that moment, but then ongoing regulation, having just ongoing practices to keep us in a space of steadiness. When the ripples happen, we can still be in that space of steadiness. So, other thoughts on that? If not, I do have some more questions for you.
Well, one thing that came up, I was thinking about, so it's been a few years since I've been in the classroom. I did want to name that because you mentioned my dissertation topic, where I talk about educational burnout. And that was the reason I left the classroom, was because I had a very hard time separating my emotions from the emotions of the students, of my colleagues, of the school. And it was during the pandemic. It was 2021 that I decided to leave the classroom. And we're now in 2026. And it has been a long journey for me to even come to a place of understanding what regulation looks like in my own nervous system because I had spent so long attuning to the emotions of others. And the other piece in my dissertation about systemic oppression is a much bigger topic for another day. But what I wanted to mention was that even simple things like, we have class periods that are a very set amount of time. We want to do our warm up, our lesson, our guided practice, our individual practice, our, bell ringer or whatever. And maybe that doesn't allow time for students to actually raise their hand and ask questions or dive deeper into the topic. That inability to allow like that space in our classrooms feels like it also just needs to be named here, right? I know that one of your previous guests talked about systemic change and how important that is for well-being for everyone, right?
Mhm.
And, just to say to educators and school leaders out there that if your practices are so adhered to a bell, to grading, to standards, to all these things that are externally focused, we're taking the attention away from the internal focus, which is what we really want our students to do. So I just wanted to name that it's important to recognize that a lot of what we might feel like is happening to us is not our fault. The system is designed that way to be maximally productive, which doesn't allow for that time and space to regulate or to co-regulate. So again, being out of the classroom for a while, I just wanted to name that, but then also say that, it has given me an opportunity to actually say, well, what is it that my nervous system needs? What is it that helps me? So that way I'm not just taking on everything that my students are bringing to the classroom and my colleagues are bringing to meetings and my leaders are, mandating need to happen. And finding that place of personal sovereignty within this system that is not necessarily designed with my well-being or an educator's well-being or the student's well-being
I was going to
at
say,
heart.
or the students, because,
Yeah.
as you were talking, like me even naming this here too, transitions are so hard sometimes for ourselves and our students, especially, and we're having them move moment by moment, like time by time, bell by bell, when we haven't offered that time to regulate or really integrate that experience of learning to then be ready to then shift to the next thing. We take for granted transitions so much. And especially for our learners that need even more support with transitions, like that's a whole other thing too with the structures that are in place. And we do need structure, and structure does help. But what I would like to maybe offer is how, and that's where educating mindfully and our ecosystem come into play, is how do we intentionally integrate our co-regulation and all the trees. And I think that's going to be our next question here. But we need to be able to have this opportunity during our teaching and our leading and our serving to be able to make those transitions moment by moment, class by class, content by content. We have the ability to do that. And we need to be able to take that ownership and allow ourselves to do that and not be worried that that's going against some curriculum or against the schedule or standard. That is what enhances our standard in learning. Oh, so yes, go ahead.
All I was going to say was that I had been trained through mindful schools back in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
2012, maybe. But it wasn't until the pandemic that I actually started integrating mindfulness into my classroom. And it was because of what you're talking about. It was like I understood that what was happening worldwide was unprecedented, terrifying, absolutely bonkers that we were back in person in schools, social distanced, masked, disinfecting everything. And I thought to myself, well, what is it that we need? And we needed that transition. We needed that moment of mindfulness, whether it was at the very beginning or the end of a class or both. And just that 1 minute, right? I offered it to my students. Let's take our mindful minute. You don't have to do anything. You can just look at the beautiful picture that I'm putting on the board. You can just breathe. You can just close your eyes. You can put your head down, but just 1 minute. And the difference that that made from when they walked in the door to then saying, okay, we're going to transition into what we actually have to learn right now was incredible. And all it took was 1 minute.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that's the invitational practice for our listeners today is maybe the next time you're teaching, if you're able to teach tomorrow, whenever you're listening to our LearnCast, to integrate 1 minute to start your class and 1 minute to close your class, and just allow that integration, that pause and integration. And I said that again, but I'm going to say it again, and integration
Yes.
um, for the experience, because mindfulness means to be fully present here and now with our full experience. And if we keep letting the moments go by, we don't get them back. So, and that goes for our learning too.
Yes, that's something I wish I learned a lot earlier in life was that every moment is just once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't come back. So let's maximize and be in this space in this moment and regulated. So, we've kind of mentioned a few ways how mindful self-regulation is connected and interconnected to the ecosystem. So, can you maybe share how the other elements within the ecosystem kind of are supported by mindful self-regulation?
Yes. I mean, I already kind of talked about how those practices that are all of the raindrops are the foundation, right? We talked about how they water the trees, they help to have those ripple effects from the self out through society. And when I think about mindful self-connection and mindful self-regulation leading to mindful decision making and mindful social connection, it feels like imperative that everyone does this. Like I think about our school leaders, I think about people who are making policy decisions on behalf of educators without actually setting foot in a classroom. And I think about how if our educational leaders, policymakers, and anyone who represents educators took those moments of mindful self-connection and self-regulation, the decision making would be so much more mindful. The connections with others would be so much more mindful and powerful. So I just think it's important to recognize that, as you've talked about since the beginning of this LearnCast, embodiment is the sun that warms and heals and nurtures this entire ecosystem. But each of these practices can be individual. They don't have to look a certain way. One thing that I had talked about when I was preparing for this podcast was about kind of creating a menu of things that work for you. And it can be super simple, right? When I think about my time in the classroom, one thing that I personally actually loved was getting there early when it was still quiet, when it was still a little dark, and just setting up my classroom and putting on music, making sure any of the handouts that I had were out, making sure the furniture was in place, making sure that I just felt like this was an inviting space for my students to come into. And that wasn't anything different, right? It was different in that I had to make a conscious effort to wake up earlier, to avoid traffic, to get to work, early. But it would have been and there were times, there was one school district that I worked in where I had two different campuses that I was on that were about a mile apart from one another. And there were times that I had to like drive and, just run and get into the classroom and start teaching. That was a much different class than when I taught the first class of the day and I had that intentional time in the morning. And so, what I really want to encourage educators and school leaders to think about is what is it that you are already doing in the classroom or outside of the classroom to prep for your days that can bring you a sense of ease. For me, grading was not my favorite thing. So I reduced as much grading as I could because I knew that that was the thing that I was going to loathe to like have my precious free time doing. But
Yes.
I loved planning and I loved coming up with like creative activities. I was a French teacher, and so I wanted my French class to be fun. I wanted it to be applicable. I wanted them to practice the skills of French. And so when I sort of designed my day in terms of like what I was allocating my free periods to do, I was minimizing grading as much as I could, and I was maximizing my creativity in how can I create these fun activities. And then, like I mentioned earlier about just getting my classroom set up, that felt really good. Or, taking a moment and putting on music. One thing that I love to do with my students was have our Mondays were reading days when I had eighth graders, and we read French Disney like stories, Disney stories in French. And I just like would put on music and like we didn't talk and they all just like read their Disney stories. They had some things that they had to fill out, but I had so much feedback from students that was like, we loved knowing that on Mondays we got to look forward to like reading and that we didn't have to, have our weekends be full of homework and stuff. Cause I was again like, I don't want to grade and I don't want you to feel like you got to do homework on the weekends. And so all of that is to say, like, I created my own educational ecosystem without even realizing it, right? I was a classroom teacher for 13 years and I didn't have much of this language for much of that time. But looking back, I can see how, because I gave myself this time to connect and regulate, I was able to make decisions about what is it that brought joy to my experience as an educator and what was it that depleted my energy that I wanted less of. And all of that helped me to make decisions to say, this is what my class is going to be. I also was very fortunate that I had a lot of autonomy, but it allowed me to sustain my career as an educator for longer than it would have. I almost left after year two. And then I did leave after year 13 because, it just got to a point where that was important. But I think it's important, and again, all I want to do is impress upon mindful leaders to say you have autonomy and there are things that you can do, and each of these elements of the ecosystem are possible in what you're currently doing. It's just a matter of reframing. Oh, this could be a well-being practice. Oh, here's a trauma supportive practice. Oh, that was an example of mindful self-connection. Oh, I'm advocating. And all of that lends itself to mindfulness-based learning, which I think is the future of education, and it should be. It's time.
It's time. uh, yes, I mean, there's so much there. And I was just writing some notes here. So, one, you mentioned that menu, and just reiterating, even for those who are listening, and if you pull up that visual of the ecosystem, and just like what Carrie had shared, maybe as you um, notice that different practices come up or different routines come up that fall into those different areas of the ecosystem, to start naming them and making lists of that menu as they come up. Maybe, we do offer a printable and even a blank copy of the ecosystem that might be within our program, but we do offer that. And so for that, maybe having a blank copy and writing in the ecosystem what those practices may be, what the approaches may be. And then also, Carrie had mentioned that she had a lot of autonomy and the creativity. And I guess that's another thing is, I see I'm writing it down so I don't forget, is one, how important creativity is. I think this came up in another episode, but that creativity is such a golden asset for educators to be inspired. Like, we go into education often knowing that impact, how we make a difference, and have that ability to think creatively and share different experiences with our learners and ways to reach their hearts. So honoring creativity, and in reaching them within the academics, if you don't have as much autonomy, another possible invitation can be, just taking a moment, looking at your curriculum, looking at, for example, even for me as a special education teacher, there were a lot of scripted direct instruction programs that I needed to do when I was in that role. But I would still be able to look at the avenues that I had leverage with before starting the program, having opportunities for students to center and just come into that regulation space before engaging in learning, where throughout the curriculum can there be the pauses, can there be the different kinds of practices that we can have in the menu. So I do want to name that too, that if you are using more structured approaches, no matter what role you're in, taking some time, like that, the beauty of this ecosystem is that, as Carrie had mentioned, there's no one way. We can look at what those components are and then see where that bridge is, and then start to integrate it into what we already are doing, as Carrie has shared multiple times. You're not doing anything extra. It's elevating our current practices that we have in a way that's very strategic and mindful.
Yes. And I think that is some of what gets lost with educators. And again, for good reason, right? The system is the way it is. It's very top down, it's very directive, it's very results oriented. None of that is bad necessarily. It just limits. So what is so powerful is to say, listen, I'm choosing to be a teacher. I'm choosing to be an administrator. I'm doing this from my heart space because of the difference I know that I want to make. And it's going to come with some aspects of the job that are not my favorite. How can I buffer that? How can I support myself through it? How can I make this as easeful and joyful as humanly possible so that I can have a sustaining career? And I think the element of presence being the mountain of the ecosystem is so powerful because it's just there and it's waiting for you to notice it. So every time you are making photocopies, you can sit there and have just a present moment. I know that I always love the feeling of like the warm
Warm
paper,
paper, yes, I
right?
know. I love that. I
No one.
know our listeners can't see this, but we both went and, like, as if we had the paper and we put it onto our heart to feel the warmth. We both simultaneously did that. So I wanted
The
to share that.
smell of it
Yes,
too,
the
like it
smell and
just
the warmth of
like
the
these
paper
are the things that like you don't think about, right? Because
and
you're
the
thinking
rhythm.
about, yes, but you're thinking about like, oh, the copier is going to break. Oh, is there enough toner? Is there enough paper? And that can be a moment of presence. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the opportunity to say, oh, I'm making a photocopy right now. Oh, I love the feeling of this warm paper against my fingers. I'm so grateful that I have a copy machine that works for the 20 copies or the 40 copies I need to
Yes.
make.
Yes. And then be sure to give gratitude to the printer before and
Yes.
after, because
Yes.
we need to give the printers very good energy.
Yeah, and all of that, I mean, we're laughing, right? And that's wonderful. And some people listening to this might be like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not going to sit there and give gratitude to a printer. And like, that's fine. But also, who's it hurting?
Mm-hmm.
Who, if there is the slightest chance that your day can be 1% better because you're taking that mindful moment, because you're being present with what it is that you have a privilege to do every single day, that to me is worth it. And if it feels a little silly, that's okay. One thing I did also want to mention is this idea of trust and resilience, because these practices are going to feel maybe a little unusual, maybe a little silly. There might be some self-judgment that comes out, but I promise, again, 5 years out of the classroom now, I notice that from 5 years ago, being like, all right, I'm going to go for my silly little walk for my mental health. Now it's a joy, right? But it took me 5 years of saying I'm going to intentionally look up when I'm walking around my neighborhood, walking my dog, picking up his business, and I'm going to say, like, wow, it is amazing that I get to be outside under a blue sky or a rainy sky, that there are leaves or that they've fallen off the trees, and just noticing. And at the beginning, it felt really silly to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to look at that tree. Oh, all right, I see the bird flying by. But now it is an absolute joy that I get to do that. and building up that resilience to the self-judgment, to the, well, that might not help me anyway, and just say, like, what if it did? And what if that ability to give yourself the gift of mindful self-regulation, and, again, the ripples have the self at the very beginning. So if the self is the one who is regulated, who is connected, who has built up this ability to notice things, that is a person who I would trust to educate, to lead, and to make decisions that are for the well-being of all involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Recapping my little notes here as well is thank you for naming gratitude and how that in itself is a regulation practice as well. So if we do notice that different things come up, gratitude immediately um, allows us to come into that space of presence and regulation. And also naming that when we are trying different things and we're changing, that is going to likely bring discomfort. And that is a beautiful thing. And, mm, I don't really know how to say what I'm saying, but it's almost like, have you ever met somebody who was present that was not a joy to be around? Right? Like somebody who is embodied and present in that moment, no matter the moment. You mentioned that you could trust them, right? Like, so just imagine what that could do in our entire learning ecosystem when we become a mountain range together and holding steady together as a team. Or I guess the last thing that I had written down too is for those who are looking for a couple other practices, we do have our mindfulness-based learning embodiment cards for educators and leaders. And there's a section in there that has practices aligned to the mindful self-regulation. So I wanted to name that too.
Yes, and I think the biggest thing I want to say is that there's no wrong way to self-regulate as long as it's not causing harm to yourself and others, right? So, at the beginning, Lindsay was like, "Are we going to talk about tarot?" And I was like, "Well, I might bring it up as like a regulatory practice for me." And again, that is not what I'm on here to say, is like tarot is for everyone. Not necessarily. For me, I find the opportunity to shuffle cards, to breathe, to tune into my own heart space, to pull a card, to reflect, to journal. That helps me to mindfully self-regulate. For someone else, it could be running a marathon. I do not want to run a marathon. That is not regulation to me.
Mhm.
I respect anyone who finds peace in running a marathon or, any distance that's, beyond chasing my dog. But all it is to say is that your practices are individual to you. And when you notice dysregulation, it's not an opportunity or an invitation necessarily to shut it down. It's an invitation to become more aware, to become more connected, and then to make that mindful decision about how do I want to self-regulate? What would feel good right now? Is it to expel the charge? Is it to distract from the charge? Is it to find another way to soothe or release? All of it is valid as long as it is supporting you in being able to come back to this sense of presence. Because when we do that, then we can move forward in a much more healthy and aligned way.
Yeah, and that's where that menu also comes into play, and just all the different ways that self-regulation uh, is available to us. And also that really is self-management, but it gets us to a space of self-regulation and naming again the mindful self-regulation is that proactive side so that we are in that space of regulation. But I just wanted to also state again just how there's these different ways for us to tune inward when we can follow the charge and see what it is that is needed again, as what Carrie had just shared, like what is that charge needing? So just before I was on here, and I had mentioned earlier in the episode how I needed to stomp. That's because I noticed that my body was naturally wanting to stomp. So I followed that charge because clearly that's something that my body needed, or like I started to put things down more aggressively. And so I was like, oh, okay, so this charge is in my body, in my feet, and in my arms. So I had to do something to allow that charge to move. And that may not be the case for other opportunities, but it was the case in the experience that I had. So just tuning into what is the body naturally doing? Is it naturally pausing? Is it withdrawing? Like that's the power of having that connection to yourself and listening to the messages within so that you can take action as needed.
Yes, and before we got on, I did the opposite. Like I sat here and I looked out the window because I had been moving all day and had come from work and had come from walking my dog and feeding him and eating something. And I knew that if I wanted to have a meaningful connection today, I needed to be more centered and aligned. And we both self-regulated independently in completely different ways. And this conversation is a result of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Ooh, well, I mean, I feel like we traveled quite a lot today. Is there anything else on your heart that you'd like to share in regards to mindful self-regulation, or are we feeling complete for our time today?
Definitely complete, but I wanted to elevate what you mentioned, which is that we all can become a mountain range
Mm,
of presence together. I think that is a beautiful image. Just thinking about anyone who's listening to this, who takes a look at the framework, who can actually begin to understand what it means to be embodied as a mindful educator, and to think about the ramifications of teachers, leaders, parents, students, policymakers, anyone else who is in this sea of mindful global citizens is coming from this place of presence, and that together we create this mountain range. So thank you for that imagery.
thank you for reiterating that. And so again, let's have a mindful pause here for a collective breath in, just breathing that in. Exhaling out as if it's the wind in the mountain range. And as we begin to close, a couple of different reminders here for our members. We will continue this conversation in our member online community. And each week this month, we will post a reflection question. So by sharing your own insights and then responding to peers, you can earn professional development hours. And that's why this is called a LearnCast, not just a podcast. So you can learn more at educatingmindfully.org/LearnCast. And we will also release a companion voices blog and the companion mindfulness-based learning lesson inspiration to support as you nurture all of the different approaches as you cultivate mindful self-regulation into your teaching and leading. So we'll invite just one more pause, just this moment to commit to maybe one action that you're able to take to extend this experience into your life within and beyond the classroom. You can always come back to this episode at any time, but just make that commitment. And in gratitude, thank all of our listeners for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And especially thank you, Carrie, for sharing space, sharing this really raw conversation and going and traveling in all different parts of our ecosystem today.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. It's always a joy to connect with you and to see Educating Mindfully in all of its iterations. I believe in the work of this organization and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
We hope this episode inspires you to take action as a mindful leader and educator. As we close, we invite you to pause where you are for an invitational breathing practice. Maybe placing one hand at your heart and/or one hand on your stomach. And together, we will take 4 collective breaths, integrating our learning, 1 breath for each ripple within our framework's educational ecosystem. First and foremost, breathing for ourselves. Inhale. Exhale. Next, breathing in for our staff. Inhale. Exhale. Third, breathing in for our students. Inhale. Sipping a little bit more air for our students. Exhale. And finally, breathing in for our worldwide community. Take the biggest inhale yet. Exhale. Consider pausing and committing a collective intention together by saying, we are mindful global citizens. We invite you to continue this conversation with us and our member online community. Learn more about our nonprofit's LearnCast membership and our mindfulness-based learning micro-credential program at www.educatingmindfully.org. My name is Dee DuBose, and on behalf of our leadership team, we thank you for learning with us as we collectively do our parts to make schools and Mother Earth better than we found it. Have a great day on purpose. Peace.